Metro, you were talking about the induced shocks. Of course, it started with demonetization, then came this GST, which was badly flawed. 8 years the government took to realize that it is flawed completely, and now they have come up with GST 2.0. My question to you is that what are the things now which the government aims to achieve in terms of consumption? Will the consumption rise? That is question number one. Will the government earn extra revenue? Will their debt decrease? These are the basic questions now. Can the government really hope to achieve it soon?
No, revenues will not rise in the short run. They may possibly rise in the medium run. How long that medium run will be, we'll have to wait to see. And I'm going to talk about that. What are the factors that will determine that how long that medium run will be? The short run revenues, the government itself, the finance secretary yesterday himself announced. He said that if you look at 2023-24 estimate based on 23-24 rates and consumption, then we will lose in a financial year 48,000 crores. Now, 48,000 crores, my understanding is about 0.3% of GDP. So that's a straight loss straight away. Now, in this financial year, because half the year is past, we will stand to lose about 22,000, 24,000 crores, half of that amount. But the full effect will be seen in the next financial year, the fiscal year. So that there's a loss. That would imply an increase in the fiscal deficit. Now, if there is an increase in the fiscal deficit, they better cut on something. Either they should cut on current revenues, revenue expenditure, which is recurrent expenditure, or they cut on capex, public infrastructure investment. So if they cut on public infrastructure assets, obviously that will reduce the growth rate a little bit. No? How much they will have to cut, we'll have to wait to see. I mean, would they cut to the full extent of the 48,000 crores loss that they will suffer, as so-called estimated? We'll have to wait to see. Okay. Now, the other question you put to me was, the first one was fiscal deficit.
Debt and of revenue, how much the government will earn.
But let me tell you why I believe the recovery of revenues for the government might get extended well into 2 or 3 years. Because that's why the states are asking for the extension of compensation cess for another 5 years. Because compensation is supposed to come to an end by the end of this year. So, and that's what the current government is thinking, that it will actually come to an end. But the states are not going to take it lying down, because if they suffer, because it's not just the center is going to suffer, the states are going to suffer, isn't it? Because they are not left with many sources of revenue. What are the two or three main sources of revenue? They have petrol, diesel, and they have alcohol. See, those are the two main sources of revenue that they are left with, other than the property taxes that local governments have. So if they're going to take a cut...
Mehrotra, the state governments earlier also did not get their dues. Now, can the government still get away by not paying the dues? Or will it become binding on them now to pay the states?
Well, the state governments have become wiser. And they are going to raise hell the moment the central government doesn't pay up. Now, it may well be that in order to compensate the central government will not only continue with the cesses that are currently in place, which are in the form of sort of surcharges on existing taxes, indirect and direct, they may actually increase that cess.
All right.
So you give with one hand, you take away with the other hand. We'll have to wait to see how this plays out, how the economics plays out. Because this is what I was suggesting to you, that my reading of the demand situation and the consumption demand overall in the country is the following. that it has been very tepid. And if it had not been tepid, private investment would have risen.
Right.
If it had been booming, then FDI would have been sustained. FDI is not
So,
coming in
so it might take another 2 to 3 years for the economy to
easily.
bounce back a little.
Easily,
Okay.
easily. No question about it. I have no hesitation in saying that this is going to reduce its revenues. So they will have to either increase their fiscal deficit
Yeah.
by a similar amount, or they will cut expenditures, or
Right.
they will have to borrow more. That means their interest outflows will increase. You get the
Hmm.
point? There's
Yeah.
no getting away from it.
Right.
Because you've
Right.
allowed the situation to worsen for so long that the chickens have come home to roost, as they say in English.
No, no, you're right. Absolutely. In fact, I want to come to the political questions now, which the opposition, of course, is going to raise these issues. And don't forget that the next budget, which is going to come in, how the government will respond. But is it some kind of an admission of guilt? The government's realization that they did a mistake by bringing in GST 1.0, and 8 years it took for them to realize that it did not work, and therefore by the admission of their guilt now they have brought in GST 2.0, which of course the drum beating calls it an achievement.
Indeed, I mean, in some ways, you're spot on when you say, I don't think we are being unkind when we say it's a recognition of a mistake. Because we've been saying this, independent economists and the
Mistake,
opposition.
but also, Professor Mehrotra, recognition of a mistake, and also is it not a complete failure of Modi's policies, which they've been bragging about?
Well, the point is that the GST rate has been such that it has been a contributing factor to the inflation rate.
Yeah,
First, you keep petrol and diesel taxes so high that even when international oil prices are down to $60, $70 a barrel, the benefits of that are not transferred. Why are they not transferred to the ordinary consumer? Because the government is very short of funds. Its fiscal deficit is high. And why is its fiscal deficit high? It's been high because its policy induced mistakes have resulted in a slowing of the economy. I mean, the growth rate has fallen to 5.8% on average over the last 11 years. It's not only because of COVID. And if they were to say it's because of COVID, then I have the following question to ask. The question is twofold. One, why was the health crisis managed during COVID so badly? Why did you impose a national lockdown of the greatest strictness
yeah,
in the world of all lockdowns at 4 hours' notice? These at a time when there were only 600 cases in the whole country, which in any case were confined to 9 cities which were international, which had international airports. That means COVID had come in from with outsiders who had traveled to India, and that's why 80% of the cases were confined to those 9 cities. So, what made you impose an at 4 hours' notice a nationwide lockdown of the greatest strictness? The Chinese didn't do that. The Bangladeshis didn't do that. Both those economies, they demonstrated positive growth in that year. What happened to us? Our growth rate fell by twice as much as the global economic growth contracted. Global economic growth contracted by minus 3.1%. Ours contracted by 5.8% in FY21. Why? Because of these two sets of reasons. Well, sorry, first one the health policy. The second is the quality of the monetary and fiscal stimulus in response to COVID. I don't want to go into the details, but it was a very poorly designed stimulus. The result was that it has taken us years to bounce back, and the result is that because jobs have not bounced back, you have a situation where consumer demand remains tepid, hence household savings have fallen, which is the reason private investment is not growing. Now, if private investment doesn't grow, you are in a vicious cycle. That
Right.
means jobs will not grow because new investment creates new jobs.
No, but
As
I also
Sarkar
want to understand from you. Of course, these factors are there. You've explained it very well. That it's not going to give any kind of an immediate respite to the government. They've anyways been facing allegations of that they've not been able to manage unemployment. Industry is not too happy with the way things are going. The startups are failing. The economy, in a way, has completely slowed down. But the point is that people also should know, and the people who are watching the program should also know as to what has really triggered the government to bring in this kind of a GST 2.0. Was it Bihar elections? What the Chidambaram has raised certain factors. Was it Trump's tariffs? Was it Bihar elections? Or was it something else? What, according to you, are the reasons? What
the
could be the reason?
immediate,
Are elections the immediate reason you see?
the immediate reason is certainly the Bihar elections. I think they want to attract the voters because they can see that the vote chori campaign is actually gathered momentum. Uh, that's one trigger. That's only one trigger. They also see the effects of earlier in policies that they have introduced to pump up demand haven't worked. Let me list a few. They began with the first policy of a reduction in corporate income tax rate in the middle of 2019. There was a loss of tax revenue for the government on account of that of about 1.45 lakh crores per annum. So that's one thing. Second, they came up with another. It didn't lead to private investment rising. Second, they wrote off, please recall, 14.5 lakh crores worth of government debt, bank debt, of NPAs. Non-performing assets were written off. The 14.5 lakhs was the size of the loss practically suffered by the banks, public sector. But what that enabled the private sector to do was to, because it gave essentially the banks took huge haircuts, and they hence wrote off those ones. Now, but the benefit of this to the corporates was that the annual profits that they were making now, they were able to use those corporate profits to repay any other loans that they had. So they deleveraged. And after that, after having reduced their interest outflow and their total debt, they have not begun to reinvest. Despite the corporate income tax rate reduction, despite the write-off of loans, they haven't managed to increase investment. That's why jobs have not grown. So that's a second failure. Okay. You wrote off the corporate debt, yet the private investment. Then you have a situation where the government uses borrowings to continue to fund money into pump in money into cash transfers. PM Kisan, the state governments are paying cash transfers. You have to increase spending on Manrega because the millions of 80 million workers went back to agriculture in a matter of 4 years. So you have to increase spending on Manrega. If you're spending much more on Manrega than you were having to, that means your expenditure. So, what you can see is that the policy mistakes cumulatively had begun to show themselves in relatively slow growth. 6.5% growth is what the government is tom-tomming as we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. Arey bhai, we were always the second fastest growing large economy in the world for the last 20 plus years. You became the fastest growing post COVID only because China's growth rate fell. China reduced its growth rate. So you became the fastest. What are you tom-tomming? You need to grow at 8%, which is what we were growing at earlier, 10 years, 2004 to 14. If you are going to create jobs, then you want, then you want to sort of wait for 8 years to do the reform. See, the GST reform has been delayed because they were short of funds. First, they cut corporate tax. Then they, increased their expenditures on all these freebies. Third, they cut personal income tax to raise demand. Right? This budget, they cut personal income tax. So all these personal and corporate income tax reductions, the debt write-offs didn't raise demand. तो इसे अच्छा अब हम GST की, this is the last arrow in our quiver. Let us launch our last arrow in the quiver. After this, they don't have any arrows left in the quiver.
Right. So you rightly put it out that this is GST 2.0 is nothing but the last quiver or the last arrow in the government's quiver. Yes.